Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and all the better for sharing a really fabulous story with you this evening. So before we get started, don't forget to go and get that lovely drink, and whatever it is, let me know about it. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it was happening again. They could hear the strange sound of heavy, ponderous feet thumping the ground outside the wooden cabin. Thump, thump, thump. Whatever or whoever it was out there on this dark, tenebrous, cold March night was certainly making its baleful, inauspicious presence known. For indeed you were left in no uncertain doubt that something was definitely out there. Whatever it was, it had to be quite substantial in size. The southeasterly wind was howling through the trees, the boughs jiggling and shaking against the feisty assault, causing anything flimsy in its wake to either snap off, break, rock, or bump rather precariously. Ostensibly, the rather dodgy window in the cabin's kitchen had almost certainly seen better days. It obviously needed replacement by the maintenance staff on the campground and had clearly been overlooked, as it was rattling continuously as the mighty wind roared. Whatever was outside the cabin right now made a distinguishable, isolated sound that was not acquainted to the wind whatsoever. Indeed, the two young girls could almost certainly discern the difference. They could hear the creature crunching the white pebbles beneath its feet that surrounded the cabin in a neat square that was now strewn with a light veil of snow. The ground heaved, groaned, wobbled and shook as the creature outside, whatever in God's name it was, moved around. Even the solid wooden floors of the cabin, that by all accounts seemed rather sturdy, almost seemed to rock and sway precariously, much like a large boat out at sea, desperately trying to stay afloat against the choppy, tempestuous, turbulent waters. The noise was scaring Bree and her friend Nikki half to death. They clung together tightly, holding on to one another for dear life, like two unsteady, inebriated drunks, buttressing each other up for support, rather like the strings in a mattress. Nikki's hand was squeezing Bree's arm ever so tightly that Bree would soon discover a whole line of bruises were about to form down her arms. The young 19-year-old girls' hearts pounded in their chests. The fear coursed through their veins. It was happening all over again, like it did every night. Nikki's earnest brown eyes grew wide with terror. Her body began to shake like a blancmange jelly. "Who is out there?" she cried in dismay. "What are they? And more to the point, what do they want?" The young girls had decided that the footsteps were not from the campground manager, for no normal human being walked like that. The girls knew that they were trespassing on private land. The campground had closed for the season. The two young girls were squatters looking for a roof over their heads. The empty cabin had seemed the perfect spot. They both had waitressing jobs in Manhattan, but couldn't afford to rent out an apartment, nor did they fancy dossing down in a homeless shelter for the night. They continued to hear the rather perturbing, anomalous footsteps walking around the cabin, stopping from time to time. They were certain they could hear whatever it was, exhaling a long drawn-out breath that sounded like a large sigh. Then it began to just walk away. Bree ran stealthily to the window, twitching back the red velvety curtain, to see if she could see anything from the window. She thought she could see the figure of a tall, dark silhouette, disappearing into the trees that fringed the cabin from 50 feet away. Whatever it was, she told her friend, it had thankfully gone. The two girls hugged each other tightly, as relief flooded over them. "What the hell is it?" said Nikki. "I have no idea," said Bree, throwing some more wood onto the fireplace to keep the fire going, as it was their only vital source of warmth. It would be the only thing that would give the young girls away, if anyone discerned the smoke rising out of the chimney. Both the girls had moved two of the settees towards the hearth to use as makeshift beds for their sleeping bags, as they were desperate to keep as warm as they possibly could, for the temperatures in the cabin were freezing cold. The cabin had no available amenities, as there was no hot water, electricity, or latrine facilities available, as the cabins had all been disconnected to the main power supply over the winter. So Bree and her friend Nikki had both found a spot behind a large red oak tree to relieve themselves, should the need arise. Bree had been careful to park her truck further away from the cabin, so as to avoid drawing any attention to their presence on the vacant campground. She had surreptitiously covered it with twigs and bracken to avoid it being discerned or detected, just in case any of the owners or employees were wandering around the campground in March. But chance would be a fine thing. They needed the truck to get to their waitressing job, as the cabin was in a rural area 20 minutes outside New York. Bree came from a wealthy, affluent family who lived in the highly esteemed upmarket Tribeca neighbourhood, but her acrimonious, uncompromising father had put a rigorous, profound pressure on her to get a law degree and go to Harvard. It would seem most people would have gladly grabbed such an amazing opportunity with both hands, but not Bree. She had no desire to become an accomplished, efficacious lawyer, so she had put her foot down firmly, standing up to her father with a very big no. Bree's father, Harper Weber, was not used to anyone saying no to him, or standing up to him as defiantly as his refractory, stubborn and headstrong daughter had done. There was a small part of Harper Weber that secretly marvelled and was rather impressed by his muleless teenage daughter's steely grit and obstinacy that she had clearly inherited from him, while another part of him was disgruntled and very peeved that his contrary, obstreperous daughter was rebelliously declining a law degree at Harvard. I mean, who does that? He couldn't for the life of him understand his daughter's enigmatic proclivity towards the world of art. In his humble opinion, pursuing a capricious creative path was indeed a slippery slope, an outlet for those that were not as clever, or for gay men who wanted to get into interior design, graphics, or become restaurateurs. He didn't feel that this vacillating, erroneous world was one he would like his daughter to embark upon. Bree had literally begged her father to send her to arts college, as she had a fervent passion for all things creative. But her old-school traditional father believed that pursuing a creative path was not going to make her amount to much in life, which Bree thought was ridiculous and nonsensical. "Well, if you won't pay for me to go to arts college, I'll find a way to do it myself," she said to her father. At that revelation her father had smirked at her. "I'd like to see you try, Bree. You'll come back home in 2 minutes begging me to send you to Harvard. You'll never be able to financially support yourself." Bree could be as bull-headed and stubborn as her father was. She was determined to show him that she didn't need his financial support. She could make her own way in the world without his help. In truth, it had been harder than she could have ever envisaged, and far from making money to go to arts college, she was barely making enough money to pay her food bills, let alone her petrol. And as for finding an affordable roof over her head, that was pretty much close to impossible. Bree had blatantly lied to both her parents, informing them proudly that she was renting an apartment, had found an online job selling fashionable clothes. Very soon she would have saved enough money to enroll in arts college, she assured them. She had discerned the audible shock in her father's voice. It was very apparent that he had never believed she was capable of making it on her own. She would show him that it certainly could be done. In truth, she felt exactly like a shipwreck. There had been times when she'd been reduced to eating cold-baked beans out of a tin. For the first time in her life, Bree had tasted the world of the disadvantaged. But hell would freeze over first before she asked for a penny from her father or admitted that she was in trouble. Nikki's story was somewhat different. She came from a low-income family, where her mother had raised over 8 children, while their father had absconded, starting a new life with a woman who didn't want to have any babies. Nikki's father could not cope with the demands of a big family. He found raising kids to be a huge headache, which he couldn't handle. It had all got too much for him, a household full of screaming, demanding children. He had left home for a while to take a break, but had never returned. He sent her divorce papers in the post. None of the children had ever seen their father since then, while her mother had to rely on the state to cover the living costs for her family. She had tried to claim child support from her ex-husband, but he had this remarkable habit of elusively disappearing off the radar when you were trying to locate his fixed address. So she had given up pursuing the man, putting him down as a complete, total and utter loser. Even though Bree had been to posh private schools all her life and had holidays abroad in exotic locations and gone skiing in Aspen from time to time, Nikki had stayed in New York at the family apartment at Flushing in Queens in the northeast Bronx area. Her mother had recently given birth to yet another kid and was pregnant again, while her new boyfriend had since moved into their apartment. For Nikki, returning home for her was a physical impossibility, as the household was bursting at the seams. "I don't know why my mother didn't have her tubes tied a long time ago," she had complained to Bree. "She only has to look at a man and she falls pregnant. I've spent my life living on hand-me-downs from my two older sisters and stuff bought at the thrift store. Life would have been a lot easier for us if my mother hadn't had so many kids in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong, I really do love and adore my brothers and sisters, but let's just say life can get very tough when there's so many hungry mouths to feed." It would seem the two unlikely girls from two completely different walks of life had become firm friends. It had been tough going staying in the freezing cold cabin, but at least it had been a roof over their heads. And as Bree had poignantly pointed out, beggars can't be choosers. Bree was very glad to have her friend Nikki for company. The two of them pooled their money together to cover their costs, and Bree could not imagine how lonely she would feel without Nikki's bright, flamboyant, upbeat personality. Even better, Nikki knew all about embracing hard times. She had a few tricks up her sleeve to make their money last longer. Tonight, Bree and Nikki were going to Bree's Tribeca home to have dinner with her parents, so they had both purchased dresses from an apartment store they were going to wear for the evening. Then they would return them the following day, as there was no way they could possibly afford to keep those dresses. It was important for Bree to give her father the impression that she was financially independent and doing incredibly well, thank you very much. So arriving for lunch dressed to the nines and looking successful was exceedingly important to her. Both girls had managed to slip into the gym, using the bathroom facilities there. Bree could not remember the last time she'd enjoyed a shower so warm, the water cascading over her body, offering her so much pleasure. By the time the two young girls had done themselves up, they looked as if they'd both stepped out of bandboxes. No one could imagine how bad their living conditions really were. "You look $1 million, said Nikki. "So do you," said Bree. "The main objective is to look as if we're financially prosperous in front of my parents." The dinner with Bree's parents, by all accounts, had gone remarkably well. They lived in a fabulously wealthy multi-million-dollar 26-foot-wide mansion on 7 floors in the heart of Tribeca, with rooms that possessed 24-foot ceilings designed by the renowned architect Philip Couther. They were about 5 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms and huge outdoor patio areas overlooking the street, fabulously decorated with outdoor furnishings and pot plants. When Nikki had seen the kind of lifestyle Bree had left behind, she was utterly astonished. Surely getting a law degree at Harvard to appease her father was infinitely more preferable than living in their current shabby conditions, she thought. Bree's father, Harper Weber, was a very distinguished-looking gentleman, someone that you would know just by glancing at was a mover and shaker in society. He demanded respect wherever he went. His portly stomach hung over his waistband, giving away the fact that he'd clearly overindulged in one too many business lunches. Nikki liked Bree's father at once. He was a charming gentleman, she thought, but she did discern that there was a formidable side to this effusive man, whom she reckoned could be a tough negotiator. "I love your home," she told Bree's mother. "It's so beautiful." Bree's mother was a warm, friendly woman, very well dressed in tailored pants and a loose cotton shirt, obviously designer, probably purchased in one of Tribeca's illustrious boutiques. She looked as if her hair and nails had been done to perfection by a very good hairdresser. She kissed both the young girls warmly on both sides of the cheek, welcoming them into the house. The dinner was absolutely delicious, as the family cook produced a phenomenal 3 to 4 course meal for 2 hungry girls. For starters, it was deep-fried camembert with cranberry sauce. Then there was a light chicken consommé, followed by a beef Wellington with Duchess potatoes and mixed roasted vegetables, and that was then followed by Bree's absolute favourite dessert, crème brûlée with raspberries. Finally, the meal had ended with a generous cheese board, chocolate truffles and filtered coffees. Of course, Bree had sagaciously warned her friend to eat very slowly, so that they would not give away their permanent state of hunger. You must leave some leftovers on your plate. We must exude the distinct impression that we're both doing fabulously well, as pulling the wool over my dad's eyes is never easy. So I take it the two of you girls work together on this online business of yours? Bree's father had asked. Yes, said Bree. We're selling designer clothes. Very nice, said her father. I must say you have surprised me immensely, Bree. I never envisaged you would make it on your own, but it seems I have been proved wrong. I'm not used to being wrong, you know, he said, wiping the crumbs away that had gathered on his moustache. I'm very proud of my daughter, he told Nicky. She's raising money to go to art college. I must say I am rather disappointed. I would have loved my daughter to go to Harvard to do a law degree, but it seems like that is not going to happen. Well, I think that's crazy, said Nicky. Why would you want to send your daughter to Harvard? It's overrated, you know. That's what I've heard anyway. Besides, if your daughter doesn't want to become a lawyer, if she acquired a degree, nothing is going to change it, is it? I mean, she still won't want to practice law. So in effect, you'll be throwing your money away. People like to follow their passions in life. An art degree can take you places, you know. You can become a famous photographer, graphic designer, artist, sculptor. There's no end of options available with a career in the arts, which could potentially be quite lucrative, possibly more so than even a law degree would be. You make a very interesting point, young lady, said Harper. I never looked at it like that before. You've certainly given me food for thought. The two girls reluctantly climbed back into the truck to make the rather sombre journey back to the desolate campground after spending a very pleasant, pleasing day with Bree's parents at their lavish, well-appointed upmarket Tribeca home. I think your father's lovely, said Nicky. Yes, granted, he is as stubborn as a mule. I'll give you that, but I'm of the resolute opinion that he can easily be persuaded and prevailed upon to send you to arts college, to pay for your fees. Don't say that, said Bree, groaning. You'll get my hopes up. I just can't believe how posh and privileged your lifestyle was, said Nicky. Your house is like an opulent swank palace. It's really beautiful. I feel positively depressed about returning back to our freezing cold cabin, along with our rather dismal cold tins of baked beans for sustenance. It seems so bleak and miserable, does it not? The two girls returned to the umbra of the uncongenial wooden cabin. It was cloaked in a velvety caliginosity, the ground covered with a thin layer of recently fallen snow. The tenebrous night offering a scant light from a somewhat obscured gloomy half-moon, along with a faint scattering of ambiguous silvery stars, shrouded by a nebulous smoky mist that seemed to rise up between the trees like a cloudy, white, steamy vapour. That night they both huddled close to the fire in their sleeping bags, while Bree poked at the fire to get it going again, as its smoky embers seemed to be dying. Imagine if my parents knew where we were living. They would have a heart attack. My father would be utterly mortified. My mother's heart would quite literally break. She'd be so upset. It's a good thing they don't examine my life with a fine tooth comb. Luckily they're too busy for all that. Well, at least you've had an education on how the other half live, said Nicky. Not an experience many rich kids like yourself have ever been privy to. Well, I'd rather not know, said Bree. What do they say? Ignorance is bliss. Nicky lit the propane lantern, so that the Cremerian shade of the living room was basked in a generous light. It took the edge off the darkness, making the cabin almost appear cosy. Then it transpired all over again. They could hear the same footsteps patrolling around the cabin, like a centurion on guard duty. It was all exceedingly bizarre. They could hear the distinctive thump, thump, thump once again. The stiff, hardened floorboards of the cabin began to wobble, even though they were so solidly built. I mean, how did that happen? Whatever was out there had to be gargantuan. That was when Nicky saw a dusky figure standing outside the living room window. The curtain had not been drawn this evening. She could see the distinctive face peering in at them through the window pane, smudging its large, flat, aquatic nose against the glass. while the deep-set, dark, treacle-coloured eyes gave off an intimidating, menacing red eye-shine. There was no way a normal human being could peer into a window 8 feet off the ground, she thought. She could see the large, inscrutable black face that took up the entire window pane. Then she saw the creature turn around and leave. But what was it? Bree's heart was thundering in her chest at 100 miles an hour. Indeed, it was thumping so fast, like a frenzied rabbit dashing into a burrow being chased by a fox. For that was when she put her hand on her chest to feel the frantic beats, while her forehead had broken out into beads of perspiration. "Did you see it?" Bree asked Nicky. "See what?" asked Nicky, who was currently lying in her sleeping bag with her eyelids shut, trying to sleep. "The face at the window, looking in at us." "No, I didn't see anything." "I think it was a Bigfoot," said Bree excitedly. "In our part of the world, please," said Nicky. "Surely not. This is New York, girl, not West Virginia." "Well, this is a rural area outside of New York. Why would a Bigfoot not live here? There are deer in the woods, a large lake, food and water sources available for it." "Oh, go to sleep, Bree," said Nicky, emitting a loud yawn. "Your imagination is running wild. You're seeing things that aren't there. I'm trying desperately to get some sleep after an afternoon spent with your parents and all that yummy food. I'm absolutely exhausted." Bree was on tenterhooks. She couldn't get to sleep. She had become agitated, restless, like a cat on a hot tin roof, after seeing a creature she thought might just be a Bigfoot. In fact, she was almost sure of it. Her curiosity was getting the better of her. If by any chance this creature was indeed a Bigfoot, then Bree wanted to get a closer look at it. She knew Nicky would put up a strong opposing resistance, almost certainly stopping her from going outdoors, so she waited until she could hear Nicky snoring. Then she threw on her jeans, a sweatshirt, anorak, woolly hat, gloves and boots, and placed a headlamp on her head. She surreptitiously ventured out of doors as quietly as she could, so as not to disturb her sleeping friend. She opened the door. The gusts of wind were so strong she only just missed stopping the door from slamming shut loudly on its hinges. She breathed a huge sigh of relief, tiptoeing furtively out of doors rather like a burglar on the prowl, trying her level best not to crunch the pebbles beneath her feet, which was a fate almost infeasible to accomplish. She shivered with the cold as the icy wind howled through the trees, punnelling her anorak like those aggressive brushes at a car wash. The lion-hearted Bree was not easily put off or daunted by her valiant, indomitable mission. If there was a Bigfoot out there, she wanted to find him. She hit pay dirt as she discovered a long line of fresh footprints in the snow, leading directly from the cabin to the woods. These footprints were enormous, easily 20 inches long. Bree could feel an excited, high-spirited thrill coursing through her veins, similar to the feeling she got when she braved a roller coaster. Even though it was freezing cold, her focus was so unshakably pronounced. She almost forgot about how cold she actually was. The vespers of twilight clasped the night with an inky blackness, devoid of light. But Bree did not care. She could see well enough with her efficient headlamp. The red oaks, the maples, the London plane trees that framed the edges of the wood grove were heavily dusted with snow, but the wind was blowing quite vigorously, causing the boughs of the branches to sway like large, powerful men, oscillating their fists around in a drunken brawl. For the more faint-hearted, cowardly, timorous or less adventurously inclined, this indeed would have been an ominous expedition that would have been fruitless for most, as they would have been wise enough to return to the safe confines of their home. Bree, however, was no cowering pussycat. She had guts of steel. Much like her father, she was a highly driven character. When she wanted something, she went for it with everything she had. Tonight was no exception. The haunting mist that rose through the trees, like an ethereal ghostly carpet, did very little to discourage her. Soon she was running through the snow. Then she saw him. The tall, dark, solitary figure with overlong, spidery arms that dangled well beyond his knees. His straight, heavily muscular back was turned away from her. He was marching through the trees, swinging his arms backwards and forwards as he moved. Indeed, he was so graceful, so agile. He almost looked like he was floating on air. Bree knew without a shadow of a doubt that this creature was indeed a Bigfoot. She darted cautiously behind one tree to another, rather like a professional hunter ambushing his quarry. She was desperate to get a glimpse of the creature's face. Her heart fluttered through her chest like a sea of butterflies. Her stomach did backflips in her excitement. Despite the extreme cold, she could feel the sweat gathering under her armpits. The 9-foot-tall creature suddenly stopped for a moment, but Bree was hidden behind a tree, hoping with all her heart not to be seen. The creature clearly sensed her presence, for he scanned the woodgrove, his nose sniffing the air, almost as if he could pick up her scent. Bree's heart pounded so loudly in her chest, it sounded like a drum roll. "Please don't see me," she begged in her heart. "Please let me have a good look at you, but please don't see me." The Bigfoot turned around while Bree peeked at him from the corner of a tree stump. She had an excellent view of the creature, even with her headlamp switched off. For a brief moment the mist had cleared. The bright golden light of the ivory moon cast its ethereal soft moonlight shadows over the creature's hair-covered body. She could see the distinctive pyramid-shaped head, the deep-set dark eyes, the inky black hair. The creature continued to walk forward, while Bree surreptitiously followed it. It stood still, tall, proud, majestic, lofty, like a statuesque imposing tree. She discerned that the Bigfoot appeared to be examining something on the ground. He pulled this thing towards him, like a large sack of potatoes. He began to slap at whatever it was, as if he was trying to rouse it. The motionless, unflinching, long vertical form did not appear to be moving. Bree realised that it was a human body, a frozen corpse that was clearly deceased. Had the Bigfoot killed it, she wondered in horror. She wanted to scream out, but she managed to hold her tongue. Now she was gripped by a terrifying, paralysing fear. She turned around, backtracking from whence she had come, hightailing it as fast as she possibly could, back to the cabin, as the adrenaline that coursed through her veins was like a steam train on full throttle. It had begun to snow. The snowflakes fell down from the overcast sky, fast, furious and thick. Bree rushed through the cabin door, slamming it behind her so hard that Nikki jumped up from her sleeping bag, looking at Bree with a somewhat bemused, befuddled expression on her face. She saw Bree standing there in her woolly clothes and anorak, bespeckled by flecks of recently fallen snow, just staring at her with wide-open eyes. "You haven't been out, have you? Out in the snow? You're covered in snowflakes. What the heck is wrong with you? You look as white as a ghost." There's a dead body in the woodgrove. A man, I think. I followed a Bigfoot into the woodgrove. It was dragging the body across the ground. I think it killed the man. What are we going to do? Supposing it comes after us." "You think the Bigfoot killed a man out there?" asked Nikki, looking terrified. "So there really is a Bigfoot out there? You weren't imagining things. You actually saw it?" Bree nodded. "I told you I thought it was a Bigfoot. It definitely was a Bigfoot. Those creatures are real." Nikki grew alarmed. "Did he see you?" "I don't think so, but it might have heard me running away." Bree began to stab 911 into her cell phone. "We have to let the police know there's a dead body on the campground." "But Bree, we can't let the police find out we're illegally squatting here. They'll ask us all kinds of awkward questions. How will we explain finding a deceased body in the first place at the dead of night? They'll guess we're squatting. We could get into a whole heap of trouble. I'll say we were going for a late-night stroll. I drove through the campground as I wanted to show you the cabins so that we could book them in summer. We decided to take a light stroll. What's wrong with that? We discovered the dead body. We can't say anything about the Bigfoot, of course. They'll think we're completely loopy. But we must let them know about the deceased man. That could be anyone's loved one who's missing." In a trice, Bree and Nikki quickly threw all their worldly possessions into the back of the truck, tidying up the cabin, brushing away any evidence of the fire in the crate. Then they got into the truck and called the police. Yes, my name is Bree Weber. I'd like to report a dead body at the Misty Hill campground, in the woodgrove there. It's a dead man. Yes, that's right. No, I think he has frozen, but I'm not sure as to the manner of his death. No, I don't live in the area myself. I'm from the Tribeca neighbourhood. I'm at the Misty Hill campground now. That's right. Yes, I know it's not open. It's off-season. But I was just showing my friend around in the dark. I know the owners, you see. I know they wouldn't mind me showing my friend around. We're thinking of hiring one of the cabins in the summer. Yes, thank you. No, I'll be here. I'm in a white SUV. I'll be waiting for you. Yes, the name's Bree Webber. There we go, said Bree, switching off her cell phone. How did I sound? Convincing, I think. But these are police we're talking about. They're good at picking up lies and fabricated stories. I hope to God they're not going to interrogate us. But what about? About the fact that you found the dead body, silly, in the woodgrove. That could make us a potential suspect. Well, at least you. About the fact that you were the one that found the deceased body. That makes you a potential suspect. Always the person who discovers a deceased body is often under suspicion. So now she tells me. I'm only looking at worst-case scenario, Bree. Very soon the campground was flooded with blue lights flashing, police vehicles everywhere. One of the police officers came and tapped on the SUV. Are you the one that called in 911, Bree Webber? That's right, officer. It was me, Bree Webber. I was the one that called in. Do you mind taking us, Bree, to where you found the deceased body? Of course not, said Bree, climbing out of the SUV, glad to be of help. She led the 3 policemen through the woodgrove with her. She was pleased to note that the trail of Bigfoot prints had been covered by a carpet of recently fallen snow. It's over there, she said, pointing to the vertical form, buried beneath a thick layer of freshly fallen snow. The ground beneath him was dappled in pink, which Bree assumed was blood. You could make out the red of the man's anorak and his beige pants, but the man looked rather like a frozen leg of lamb you'd take out of the freezer to defrost. The policeman ran over to examine the corpse of the dead man, taking care not to touch the body. He began to speak on his walkie-talkie. Yes, it's a deceased body. Been dead for approximately 24 hours, possibly more, I would say. Yes, well nourished, in his early 60s. We need to call the coroner. It looks like the man was killed with multiple gunshot wounds. There's blood all over the snow, but it's not a lot. It looks like overkill. Definitely personal, my thoughts exactly. Someone close to the victim, I imagine. But I'm not sure they were killed here. Not enough blood around the body. Bree was astonished. Gunshot, she thought. The Bigfoot I saw could not have killed the man. Bigfoots don't use guns. Yet she'd seen the creature pulling the body. Maybe he'd been examining it, she thought, feeling guilty of falsely accusing the creature of murder. So someone else had killed the man. But the question was who and why. Do you need to talk to us, Bree asked the police officer. I mean, I only saw the body, but I know nothing else about it. We never heard gunshots ourselves, nor did we see any strange, suspicious man loitering around the place. So there's really not much else we can tell you. Well, give us your details, said the police officer, so we can keep in touch with you. I'm waiting for the coroner. The area will be covered in crime scene shape shortly. It looks like this case is not going to be that difficult to solve. We need to find the person who has a huge grudge against this man. Then we're more than likely to find our killer. You never shoot a body dozens of times over, long after they're dead, in my professional experience, unless you have an axe to grind with someone. My guess is he made someone very, very upset. Who is he? Asked Bree. No idea, said the officer. We're going to have to take his fingerprints, run them through our Federal Bureau of Investigation automated fingerprint system to see if we get a likely match. We'll possibly have an answer to your question shortly. I don't think he's a vagrant. You can see he's remarkably well-dressed, decent-looking clothing, well-groomed, shaved, even though your hair does grow after death. He doesn't look unkempt. Well, what was he doing out here? On an empty campground of all things, asked Bree. Maybe he wasn't killed here. He could have been dumped here. With the campground closed for the season, the killer possibly thought that his body would have been eaten up by wild animals, which is more than likely when there are lots of hungry animals in the cold weather, before anyone is able to identify him.
What he didn't realise is that there are other ways to identify a corpse, even if you find a few scattered human remains. We have a useful thing called DNA, and then there's dental analysis.
Bree joined Nikki in the truck. They drove to her parents' home in Tribeca, as Bree decided sleeping in the car was not the best option for them that night, while returning back to the cabin was out of the question now with the police all sniffing around. "What are you going to say to your parents?" Nikki asked. "It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. Aren't your parents going to freak out with us arriving at their house so early?" "Watch and learn," said Bree, winking at Nikki. "I'll show you how we'll get a comfy bed for the night, without my parents suspecting a thing. Where there's a will, there's a way. You just have to be creative, and let's just say I have oodles of creativity in me." Bree parked her truck on the outside pavement on the tree-lined street. It was deathly quiet. The street was now covered in snow. They knocked on the door and could hear footsteps racing down the staircase, someone fumbling with a lock. "Dad, it's only me," called Bree. Her father opened the door to the two girls. He was wearing a dark navy and cobalt blue striped dressing gown. He looked as if he was half asleep.
"Do you girls realise what time it is in the morning? Is everything all right? What are you doing here? I thought we got rid of you this afternoon."
Bree wrinkled up her nose. "Our apartment's been fumigated, Dad, for an infestation of roaches. We couldn't breathe in there. It was so stuffy. I was getting a thumping headache, so I decided to come home if you don't mind. We can't sleep with all that chemical stuff in the air. They said it was safe for us to return, but I'm struggling to breathe in there."
"Did you not know it's not healthy to stay indoors once a property has been fumigated?" "I don't like the sound of that headache of yours," said her father, ushering Nikki and Bree indoors. "We have 4 extra bedrooms in this house, so you girls take your pick. Right now I'm going straight back to bed. You caught me in the middle of one of my great dreams. I need to get right back to continue where I left off," he said. "Help yourselves to anything you need." And with that he tottered up the staircase, making eager tracks to his bedroom. "See, I told you," whispered Bree. "Comfortable, warm beds for the night, at your service."
"This is such a pleasant, delightful surprise," said Mrs. Webber, when Bree and Nikki joined her for croissants and fresh orange juice on the patio the following morning. "Oh, I'm thrilled to have you both staying over here for a change. Bree, I feel as if we haven't seen you for ages, with your being so busy with that online business of yours," she said, sipping her coffee. "You know, Nikki, my daughter is as stubborn as her father. The two of them are like 2 peas in a pod. Harper wanted Bree to go to Harvard, but as I kept telling him, that boat has already long since sailed. I mean, Bree, you look absolutely exhausted these days. I've noticed the dark circles under your eyes. You can tell me to stop interfering, but it seems to me you're burning the candle at both ends, working way too hard with your online fashion business to raise the cash for Arts College, just to make a point to your father. I mean, really, heaven knows what that apartment of yours is like if you had to get it fumigated. What sort of place is infested with roaches? Sounds like the place you're staying at is not very desirable. I think your father should pay for Arts College and be done with it. The way I see it is there's no point in Harper persuading you to do law. It ain't going to happen. He needs to get over it."
"What's not going to happen?" asked Harper, joining the 3 women for breakfast, helping himself to a croissant and some coffee.
"I was just saying, dear, that you and Bree are like 2 peas in a pod, as stubborn as hell. You wanted Bree to go to Harvard to do law, didn't you? But she wanted to go to Arts College. She's raising the money to go there, just to make a point to you. But look at her, darling. Look at those dark circles under your poor daughter's eyes. What about this apartment she's staying at that needs fumigating? I dread to imagine what the place looks like. I think, Harper, you and Bree should call a truce. You should agree to pay for her to go to Arts College. Forget about Harvard. It's all pie in the sky now."
"You don't need to convince me about that. If you must know, Nikki over here persuaded me at dinner that sometimes a career in fine arts can be very lucrative indeed. It's not as fickle as I thought it was. I've been doing some research on the matter. I find she's absolutely right. So I'm going to pay for you to go to Arts College, Bree, so you can give up your online business."
Bree tried not to look ecstatic.
She maintained a fixed expression on her face. "No, it's fine, Daddy. I'll raise the money myself. I told you I would." "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," said Nicky, giving Bree a nudge. "I'm sure she'll accept your kind offer, Mr. Webber." "Thanks, Dad," said Bree. "Nicky's right. I would be foolish not to accept your offer. The truth is my online business is rather draining me. I'm worn to a frazzle." "Good. That's settled," said Mrs. Webber, looking pleased. "Also, girls, I would prefer you to stay here. I'm concerned about that apartment of yours with all the fumigation. You can both stay here for as long as you like. Please phone that landlord of yours. Give him your notice. Tell him you shan't be returning any time soon." Nicky and Bree gave each other happy winks from across the table, heartily relieved that the days of eating cold-baked beans out of a tin and counting pennies and squatting in a cold cabin were well and truly behind them. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," said Bree, "I just need to make a phone call." "Officer Alinsky speaking. How can I help you?" "Hello, officer. This is Bree Webber speaking. I met you last night. I was the one that called in the dead body that I saw in the woodgrove at the Misty Hills campground. I'm phoning to find out if you know who the dead man was. Have you managed to catch the perpetrator? Or is it still early days? I'm jumping at the gun, champing at the bit to find out exactly what happened. I must apologise, officer, but I am very inquisitive." "Oh, hello, Bree," said the officer, chuckling at the end of the phone. "No need to apologise for being curious. You have every right to be in the circumstances. Well, given you found the body, I think you deserve to know what was going on, as without your invaluable phone call, it would be a long time before the next of kin would be informed about their loved one. Yes, we found a match for the fingerprints. They belong to a man called Lennon Shutterstock. We brought the brother in for questioning. He was very distraught. The moment I got a glimpse of his face, I had an inkling that somehow he was involved in his brother's murder. Being an officer for many long years, you rely on your instincts an awful lot, as well as body language. It's a rather sad, unfortunate fate of affairs, as they often are. Lennon's brother Merlin Shutterstock confessed to the murder, almost at once. He wasn't very good at hiding his guilt. He is very remorseful, poor man. I don't think he really fathomed what he'd done. He reacted very adversely in the heat of the moment, in an impassioned, heated frenzy that got way out of hand, as is often the case." "So his own brother killed him? But that's terrible. Why would he do a thing like that? I don't understand." "Well, Lennon was having an affair with his brother's wife. When he found out about it, he snapped. Did I not say a body with that many bullets in is a clear sign of someone who has an axe to grind? I think the coroner must have found 24 bullet holes in the body. He was killed on the second bullet, but the brother kept on shooting him long after he was dead. He was so filled with rage." "Was he killed at the campground?" asked Bree. "I mean, you were saying there wasn't enough blood. Well, not as much as you expected to see given the wounds." "No, the brother dumped him there." To cut a long story short, Bree did fulfill her dream. She ended up going to arts college and is now a very successful photographer. Her father gave her friend Nicky a job at his company, where she worked as a secretarial assistant. She was able to lift herself along with her family out of poverty. She now lives with her large family in a decent home in a middle-class neighbourhood in New York. Bree often thinks of the anomalous encounter she had with a Bigfoot. She still feels guilty for assuming the creature was guilty of murder. She has now come to realise that in the rural areas and forested parts of New York, there may well be Bigfoots. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.